So I just finished reading Ali Abdaal's new book, Feel Good Productivity, and in this video I'm going to talk about 3 key segments that this book is divided in, and the key lessons and insights from each of these segments, and my own opinions on each of them. But before we get to that, let me just start off this video by saying that this is actually a great book. It's a great book for 2 main reasons. Number 1, because of the philosophy it endorses, which is very refreshing, and I will talk more about that in a minute because I think that's something that's really important and more people should be talking about it. And number 2, because the way this book is packaged. Because you see, a great book doesn't always tell you something new, but it often tells you the already known things in a new way. Things that you may have read elsewhere, but couldn't understand properly because of the way it was told, or things that did not resonate with you when you first read them. And that's why certain things need to be told again and again by different people in different ways. So in that sense, this book is very much like Ali's videos. And what I mean by that is that it's very well structured. There are 3 segments in this book, and within each of those segments, there are 3 chapters. And within each chapter, there's one central argument, and in the support of that central argument, there are 6 science-backed experiments, frameworks, his own personal stories, and other supporting ideas. So in that sense, it's a very clean and a very memorable way to present his philosophy around productivity. And it's also very logical and to the point. He says the right things in the right way and in the right order. But it's the underlying philosophy of this book that should be the prime reason why anyone should read it. Because right now, there are a few popular philosophies and pieces of advice around productivity, and they seem to be on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum is this idea of doing hard work through discipline, through endurance and pain. And that approach is likely to bring up negative emotions, and those negative emotions make you feel terrible, but you're supposed to embrace them, wrestle with them, defeat them. And when you do that, when you go against the waves, you succeed. It gets the job done. So it's also the most popular narrative out there, and it gets a lot of respect in the world of productivity, as it should, because it's a hard way to do things and not everyone can do it like that. And honestly, most of us grew up with this kind of advice. It has been drilled into our psyche that in order to be successful, we need to work really, really hard, and hard process is all about suffering. So this approach, this idea that we have been fed all our lives on some level, doesn't feel like it could be everyone's cup of tea. It feels like there are a lot of sticks and very few carrots in that process, which can be discouraging and honestly counterproductive at times. But on the other end of the spectrum is the positive psychology-led productivity philosophy, which is where this book is placed. Which, by the way, doesn't exclude the importance of hard work from the equation, but is based on the research that says that embracing positive emotions broaden our awareness and build cognitive and social resources that we often need for success. So basically, the idea is that when we feel good, our minds open up, we take in more information, and we become more efficient. We are also able to spot a broader range of solutions for problems we face, which then creates a positive mood, which in turn leads to the absolute necessary resources that we need for success. Things like resilience, creativity, problem solving. So these broaden and build processes kind of feed each other, and in that process create success and growth. So basically here you are using your positive emotions as you do the hard work, whereas in the previous case of enduring pain, you are trying to overcome negative emotions and often trying to run away from them. And that could literally turn into toxic productivity because it can lead to both physical and mental health issues in different forms. Physical problems in the form of like high blood pressure and heart diseases, etc., and mental in the form of anxiety and frustration. So that's why I think this book is important, because it endorses this idea that in order to be successful, you don't have to suffer and you can feel good as you do the hard work. And that's something that I obviously believe to be true, because when I read a book of this nature, I'm obviously looking to learn more stuff, but in that process, I'm also looking to either affirm my own beliefs or have them challenged. And I think this book did not challenge many of my current beliefs because it says the right things, good things, things that I mostly agree with, but then it definitely affirmed what I believe to be true, and now I also have a fresh perspective around why it is true. And on top of that, I'm also walking away with some newer valuable tips that I can actually implement in my life, which is amazing. So anyway, this book is divided into 3 segments called Energize, Unblock, and Sustain. So basically the idea is that in order to be productive and feel good at the same time, you need to feel energized by certain things, but that's often not enough because you will still have certain blocks in the process that you need to eliminate. And once you eliminate those blocks, you still need to sustain that pace, that momentum, that mindset throughout the process. So in the first segment, Energize, he talks about 3 main ingredients called play, power, and people that make you feel energized. Basically, the idea is that you need to treat your work as play, meaning you need to add a little bit of fun to everything you are doing. You also need to have the second P, power, which is short for self-empowerment, which is this idea that you have more control over your life than you realize in any situation. And then there's the third P, which is all about the people that you are around, the people that you work with, the people who energize you. So I would say this 3 Ps framework is pretty neat, it's pretty sticky, and it's a nice way to evaluate your own approach towards productivity, to look at your own mindset, to look at your own setup, the kind of work conditions you have. So that's like the overall theme of the first segment. Now, there are 3 specific things that I really loved from this segment. Number 1 is this idea of enjoying the process more than the outcome. Now, I know it's not a new concept, it's an age-old concept, and I'm sure you would have heard it a lot of times yourself, that the journey is more important than the destination. It's been, taught since the time of Stoicism. It's part of Buddhism as well. It's also a popular teaching in Bhagavad Gita that talks about doing the duty and finding fulfillment in it and detaching from the outcomes or results. So yeah, it's not a new concept, but the problem is that we just know this in theory and we don't really practice it. So it needs to be said by more people and more often. So one way this can be really worked out is if you immerse yourself in the work and not worry about the outcome. So one way to fully immerse yourself in the process and enjoy it is to be in the flow state. And this flow state is basically achieved when your skills meet or complement the difficulty level of the task. Meaning, if you're doing the task that is too difficult, it will lead to anxiety and frustration. And if it's too easy, it will lead to boredom or unfulfillment. So you basically need to find that balance in your work that gets you in the flow state, because when you do that, then the work becomes more enjoyable and you feel more present. The second thing I loved from this segment is something called the confidence switch, which is this idea that confidence isn't something you're born with, it's something you learn, which is such a crucial concept because just like the idea of motivation, we have got the idea about self-confidence all backwards. We think that we get motivation first and then we go and do the work. That motivation to do hard work, let's say things like going to the gym, comes first and then we get up and go to the gym. Whereas the truth is that if we went to the gym regardless of how motivated we feel, the motivation will follow. Because for most of the hard things in life, the struggle comes first and the reward comes later, which is quite the opposite of easy things where we get the reward first and the hard work or the struggle comes later. So that's the same for confidence as well. We think we will do the thing when we feel confident about them, whereas the truth is that if we did the thing anyway, then we'll become confident at it. So this book talks about you being your own hype man, where you cheer yourself, where you hype yourself up when you're feeling underconfident, which honestly is a great mindset. And I like to think of it as the coach voice in your head. That coach voice tells you to be more encouraging, be more positive, be more constructive, be more resilient in how you approach a task. So while the book talks about asking yourself how it would feel if you were confident at a particular task, I think what also works is visualizing success, visualizing how you may feel after doing that thing, something that athletes often focus on. They focus on how they may feel after they cross that finish line. There's also a book called The Choice Point that talks about something similar. And this idea of self-talk is also a popular CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy concept, where you look for positive examples from the past where you actually succeeded at something similar. And honestly, it's not a magic pill. The chances are that despite having that kind of an approach and trying a bunch of these tips, you may still not succeed and fail. And then there is a risk that you may feel underconfident and that self-doubt would creep in. So in such cases, it's important to tell yourself that it's okay. Just because you failed at something doesn't mean that you are a failure. The idea is that no matter what the stage or the circumstances are, you have more autonomy than you think, and you can really take ownership in those situations. And the third point that I really liked in the segment is something called the competitor versus the comrade mindset, which is all about this idea that there are certain people that energize you and then there are certain people that drain you. Now that's very true in life in general, whether it's your own work or family or a circle of friends. Some people have the tendency to put you down, to have an edge over you, and then there are some people that have the tendency to lift you up as they succeed. And I think it aligns very well with something called the scarcity versus the abundant mindset, where people who have the scarcity mindset, they think that the metaphorical pie, which could be anything, money, fame, lifestyle, is kind of limited. So they think that if other people have more of it, then that means that they will naturally have less of it. So they try to put others down as they are trying to lift themselves up. And on the other hand, there are people who have the abundant mindset and they think that the pie is unlimited and everyone can have as much of it as they want. So they try to lift others up as they succeed, because it brings them more joy. And there's an amazing book called The Status Games by Will Starr that I would recommend anyone who is watching this video, where the whole idea is that we humans are always playing status games with each other in every way possible, whether we realize it or not. There are some obvious ways in which we do this, like having more wealth, a better lifestyle, more fame, money, whatever. And then there are some non-obvious ways, very subtle ways, things like name dropping in a conversation, having some sort of an exclusivity in some sort of a knowledge or insight, or the habit of correcting others, things like backhanded compliments. And once you're aware of this concept, you can immediately start seeing it everywhere and realize why and how certain people can be draining. And the ones who drain you are often the ones who are trying to play these games with you. So basically try and avoid those people and lean on the ones that make things easier for you. Alright, so the second segment of the book is all about unblocking things that hinder your productivity, and it's called Unblock. Because when you have worked out all the P's that energize you, then that means that you have overcome certain hurdles. You have figured out the first part of the puzzle. But that's not always enough, because there are still things like procrastination or uncertainty or avoidance that are often underneath our behaviors that make us not do the thing that we really want to do. They try to stop you at every stage of the process. They become these invisible barriers on your way to success. So this section of the book that talks about things like unblocking your potential, about seeking clarity, about finding courage, about getting started by reducing friction in your environment, is perhaps the most important section of the book, because usually these issues are psychological barriers, and that's where most of us struggle on a daily basis. And because these are psychological barriers, they are hidden from you. They could be your blind spots. And because they are your blind spots and you don't see them, you start treating the symptoms instead of the real conditions. So take procrastination, for example. When most of us are procrastinating about doing certain work, we are actually trying to avoid the feeling that the work brings up on the surface. Now, these feelings could be, things like the feelings of frustration or failure or shame or anxiety or confusion. And they are deeply rooted in your past experiences, in your traumas. So procrastination in this case is just your bad coping mechanism. And yet when we think about someone who's procrastinating, we simply think that that person is lazy or he doesn't have enough discipline. But if you were to monitor all areas of his life, you would see that he's really procrastinating in certain areas, but he's really disciplined in other areas. The areas where he's really disciplined are the areas where he has a healthy belief system or a positive mindset, whereas the areas where he is procrastinating, he may have unhealthy beliefs and a negative mindset. So this book definitely touches on this idea of identifying your blocks and overcoming them through different methods, things like asking why 5 times to understand the cause and effect relationship of an underlying problem. It also talks about modifying your SMART goals into NICE goals, which I thought was a really nice and a really valuable add-on to an existing idea. Or even, things like time blocking, where you assign different times of your day for certain activities, or the method of habit stacking, where you do the work X, but then combine it with another existing habit Y. And I think these are all great general tips from a productivity book. And I'm intentionally calling them general tips because they cater to everyone. But I think the real ways in which you overcome these issues is by doing your own inner work, by understanding your own behaviors and blocks a little better, by recognizing patterns in them, by untying the knots of your past traumas, by seeking therapy, by journaling, by meditating, by watching your own mind and belief systems constantly, and then adopting methods or practices that work the best for you, the ones that are helpful in getting over your psychological blocks. Because just like all workout routines aren't for everyone, and you need to find the ones that work the best for you, the unblocking methods also need to be personalized to everyone's needs. So you need to find the ones that work the best for you. But this book also talks about finding courage to get over your fears, because usually that's one of the biggest blocks that we often have, whether we realize it or not. And I really like the idea of 10-10-10 rule in this book, which is this idea that in order to reduce the magnitude of fear, you should ask yourself whether that thing that is making you sad or fearful, would it matter in 10 minutes? And if it did, would it matter in 10 months? And if it did, would it matter in 10 years? It's a nice way to evaluate the impact of an event in your life, because without giving it the right perspective, without evaluating it through a rational lens, we usually tend to exaggerate it. We start thinking that it really matters way more than it actually does. And because of that, it slowly starts seeping into all other areas of our lives. But the area that often gets impacted the most is our self-confidence. And once our confidence is taken away from us, everything seems harder than it actually is. And that leads to overthinking, confusion, lack of clarity, and a bunch of really bad blocks in some form or the other. Because at the end of the day, life is a single-player game. You are trapped in your head all the time, and you make sense of the things around you in your own ways, and you respond to them in your own ways. So it doesn't really help if you are in constant battle with your own mind. So it's really important to understand that, because that's what usually stops us from moving ahead. It slows our progress. And so that leads me to the last segment of this book, which is all about sustaining your momentum. Now, let's say you have mastered the art of getting started. You have overcome some really common psychological barriers that stop most people from moving ahead. So in that sense, you are doing really well, and you are better than 90% of the people. But even then, there are other things, other challenges that may stop you from continuing the progress, which is what the last section of this book is all about. It talks about conserving your energy, recharging yourself, and keeping your goals aligned with your values. Because has it ever happened with you where, let's say, you are enjoying the process and the progress to an extent that you end up biting more than you can chew, and you don't want to chew further, but you have to chew regardless of how you feel. So basically you start suffering by even doing the thing that you actually love doing, but then you're doing too much of it. You are not taking enough breaks. You are waiting for your mental and your physical battery to deplete completely before you recharge it. And these are all the symptoms of a typical burnout. And it's called burnout because you ultimately end up using all your finite physical, mental, and emotional fuels to manage your work. And just like a machine shuts down once all those things are used, you will also shut down once your battery depletes. So in this book, Ali talks about something called the energy investment portfolio, which I thought was a clever way to segregate your energy into things that you need to be doing right now and things that are meant for the future. And the idea behind that is that you sort of eliminate the risk of overcommitment and understand your own limitations. And even the advice like saying no to most of the things that really don't excite you, things that distract you from your own important tasks, or things like adding friction between you and the distractions that steal your attention and energy. In this book, there is also this mention of taking breaks, not only when you need them, but also regularly to feel recharged and also to avoid errors. And I think all of those are great tips to sustain momentum, but I also think that the major problem with burnouts often is the fact that it's very insidious in nature. Meaning, the first few times when you're suffering from a burnout, you don't even realize it. It comes without a clear warning sign. And then it takes some time for you to even understand that feeling. And honestly, until a few years ago, this word was not in the mainstream media, as far as I can tell, and there was not enough awareness around it. So we do not know how to understand or label that emotional state. But now that we are slowly understanding this, I have also realized that at the core of this kind of problem is the lack of self-awareness, because all of us are different. So naturally, all our tipping points are different. So it's important to understand your own personal tipping point, your own symptoms of burnouts, and then find out the root cause for it, and then follow all these tips that you can find in the world and choose the best ones to overcome it. And a part of that choosing process can look like focusing on things that recharge you, things that drain other people but could give you more energy because you enjoy them, but also things that are really important, things like movement, like mindfulness, spending time in nature, because those are really proven, solid, verified ways to feel energized. Because if you don't feel energized while doing your project, you cannot sustain it for very long. But there is something other than all of this that is at the root of these kinds of problems. It's how you feel about your own work. And how you feel about it usually has something to do with how aligned it is with your own values. Because in order to sustain the progress, you not only need to minimize the burnout, but also keep aligning yourself to what you value the most. And this applies not only to the long-term goals and the values associated with them, but also with your short-term goals and your own personal values. And if you want to know more about how these core values lead to success, you can watch this video where I talk about them in detail. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.